We're gonna do it back again. We're not starting over, but yeah. So it did get the last part of what you just said. So, um, do you have any questions, Pastor?
Uh, well, just as for clarification purposes. So let's say, for instance, a pastor decides to publish his sermons in a book, which lots of pastors do. Would you find that um, this would be something that you could get compensation for, or would you object to that based on your understanding?
Yeah, so there's different aspects to this, right? Like one is this work that the church should be supporting, or even others, outside the church who recognize that this is a worthy minister? Yeah, absolutely, he should be supported for that. It might be more or less difficult to coordinate that. The question is, should that be coming in through sales? Now, I have no problem with a secular publisher selling print editions. A lot of people will go through like Kindle Direct Publishing, and basically they're not, they'll set it to the minimum cost, so they're not making any money. It's just Amazon that's making money through it. So that would be one example that I wouldn't have a problem with. But no, I don't believe that the message itself should be sold, so that you're setting up a paywall and saying you can only have access to this teaching if you pay for it. And just to give one example, uh, this whole royalty system that made this possible has only existed since 1710. 1710 was when the Statute of Anne was passed, which is the first modern copyright law that has existed. And before that, the way that this would work is that authors would write their books for free. They'd be supported by some patron, right, who would, at the beginning of their book, they would say in honor of, this queen or
Right.
et cetera, right? And they'd be getting funding from, this patron who would care about their work. But then as far as the publication of the book, that was just a secular printer, grabbing up that work and printing it. So Martin Luther published tons of things and people made a ton of money off of his work, but he wasn't making any money off of it. He was giving it for free, and people were free to copy it. There were no restrictions on copying. In fact, at one point, he was offered what was the equivalent of greater than any salary he had ever made as a yearly fee if he would just give one publisher the rights to get a first print, not even exclusive printing. Once it got printed, anybody else would be able to copy it. But they just said, just keep it a secret and give it to us first. And he was unwilling because he believed that he would become a peddler of the gospel if he had done this, according to 2 Corinthians 2:17.
Okay. So would you say the same thing with regard to like Wycliffe Bible translators? These guys are taking God's word, translating it into languages for unreached people groups and things like that. I would, how would they, or would they be eligible for compensation for their efforts as well?
Yeah. Once again, and I think Wycliffe does a lot of this, raising money from people who want to see these translations be made. I know I've supported Bible translators in the past because I desire to see Bible translations made. But that's different than locking down the rights so that you can sell these things. So you've got this, very small people group that's very poor, and that's not even, a good way of making money. Really, it's through understanding that there are people who are in better positions to help make this happen.
Okay. Yeah, some of the issues that we have, like we do ministries in the Philippines, and they have lots and lots of dialects and things like that.
That's right.
And to be able to, and some of these guys, they live in the mountains and they rarely come down. I mean, they're doing their ministry up there in their villages and stuff like that. And how do you get to these people without doing some type of copyright infringement? There was a neat little quiz I believe you had on your website that outlined some of the restrictions that there are with regard to some of the versions, particularly like one I'm particularly fond of is New American Standard. And so something as simple as Third John, and it being either an entire book or more than a certain percentage of whatever it is you're addressing, can throw you into copyright infringement issues. How how um, how do you I guess there's just no way, because what'll end up happening is you do something nice and somebody else is going to go out there, copyright it, and make $1 million off of it and lock down the privileges to it. So do they do this preemptively, or have you found that, well, I guess that's outside the scope of our conversation, but I'm just, it does seem awfully restrictive, but at the same time, there's so much effort that goes into some of these publications. It would seem a shame to limit their ability to be compensated for their work.
Right. Right. Well, once again, I definitely believe that people should be supported for the work of ministry, and I would love to see translators well supplied by folks who are eager to support it. And there are so many people care about the Word of God. There's a lot of funds available for that. It doesn't have to happen through a sales model. Now, your question about locking things down after, as though if you put it in the public domain, someone else could take it and then copyright it themselves. I wrote an article on this recently. If you go to sellingjesus.org, the website you were mentioning a minute ago was copy.church, but there's another website called sellingjesus.org, and there's a recent article. I think I've published it. Yeah, I think it's already published. Called On the Specter of Copyright Hijacking. And basically, it's just explaining that this is not how copyright law works, that if somebody releases something into the public domain, that doesn't mean it's up for grabs for others to then copyright. It is your right to be able to put it into the public domain, and no one can take it out of the public domain. They could make a derivative work and then call that copyrighted, but that's not but they can't copyright the original work.
So what then would be some of the most gross offenses that you can think of out there with regard to your Dorian principle?
Yeah, good question. Some of the worst offenses are kind of folks who are stuck in older models. So I know Tim Keller has passed away at this point, but his sermons, I believe, are still being sold. Just like audio collections of his sermons that his church, paid him to preach, and for $1,000 or $2,000, you can get a download of all of them, or they'll send you a flash drive of them.
Mm-hmm.
So people figured out pretty early on in the internet, and they didn't figure this out immediately. They started, people were selling sermons for a while, and then John Piper was one of the first ones to stop doing this, and then other people realized, oh wow, this is really working to just give them away freely. So that'd be one example. People kind of stuck in older models of doing things. But then, there's a lot of books that are, it's not just the paper, right, that's being sold. You can't get access to the teaching at all in even a digital format unless you pay them. The way that a lot of conferences are set up, even to stream the conference and to get access to it, you have to pay. And then on top of that, we've got, on top of, this whole principle about reciprocity, et cetera, there's also James 2, which talks about the partiality of telling to the rich person, you can sit here, and telling to the poor person, you sit over here and watch the stream. There's a James 2 issue going on there as well. And then seminaries, right? So seminaries operate on a lot of donations. So what I'm describing isn't like a radical upheaval of everything. If they could shift to being 50% donations and being 50% tuition to being 100% donations and 0% tuition, that would solve the problem. So yeah, I think seminaries are another very common example of this.
I'm not, I don't necessarily claim to be on the inside skinny on any of that stuff going on in seminaries, either in general or specifically, but I am a seminary grad myself, and I know that sometimes the professors, it's either publish or perish, and they write their books, and then they have a captive audience there that they require to purchase.
Yeah.
So they not only get salaries from the school, but they also get proceeds from book sales because the books are considered to be required reading. Would you find that to be out within the that which should be considered taboo? You shouldn't do stuff like that, or?
Well, certainly if I'm a professor of a seminary and I write a book because I think it's good and then I assign it to the class, there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with that is all the financial incentives involved.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that is part of the problem here is that, they are selling this and then they're like, requiring people to buy it and so on. That's just not appropriate. So as since writing the book, I have one chapter on history in the book, but after writing the book, I've gone back and done a lot more historical study. And one thing I'm very curious about is how seminaries used to operate. I have found probably about 5 or 6 examples of seminaries before the 1800s that all operated for free. I have not found any old seminaries that charged. Not one. I don't have an example of this. And so I'm wondering if just the whole model of seminaries charging is a relatively new thing.
Well, Mr. Owens, you have to realize that the state was paying for all these seminaries.
Well, no, I mean, it certainly was the case that the king out of his majesty, his majesty meaning like his royal wealth, is doing these things. And I think that's very different than our public model where things are owned in the name of the people and then doled out in the name of the people. If you have one guy who's just, really well paid and then he out of his private wealth is making these things happen, I think that's totally appropriate. Right. And that's how a lot of these things used to work, is by wealthy people donating to make them happen. And even those who are not wealthy, also supporting the cause. Spurgeon's college, like all these things were free. They all used to be free. And the professors were not being paid through the seminary. They're being paid through their local churches. So they're like, because you don't have back then, from my understanding, and it's a limited understanding, but back then you just didn't have this thing that you have today where people are these full-time professors in this way, where they're not practicing the actual work of ministry. I just want to throw out one more example out there, because a lot of people have trouble kind of realizing how trapped they are in like a very limited mindset about how things work currently. It was not that long ago, for about 100 or 200 years, that pew rents were very common, where they considered it just a little distasteful to pass around an offering plate. So instead, they would charge you rent for a pew, and if you wanted this pew, it would cost this much, and this pew that much, etc. And you can look up stuff on this. There were tons of books written on it, and so just because something is very common doesn't mean that it's going to be normal in the whole course of history. One day we're going to look back at a lot of these things that we're doing now and be like, oh man, they thought that was a good idea. It's a terrible idea.
We have the non-tithers board. I don't know if you've seen that before.
Yeah.
But I would say just kind of same topic, but just kind of branching off. What about like music, as far as music is concerned, and like melodies and stuff like that? Would you say that in terms of copyright, there are certain copyrights that we could have on music that aren't like, hey, we're going to go sue you type of thing?
Are you asking about like worship music?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's one interesting area, is worship music, because people, because of copyrights, they charge churches, and then there's CCLI, which is, a service you can pay for that covers most of these. But then the things that they don't tell you is that in the US, you actually don't need that for a public worship service. You don't need it for streaming live. You do for like the recording afterwards, and you do if you end up printing and not taking the printing back. But you can actually get around CCLI legally in a lot of very simple ways. But yeah, I'm not sure I'm really answering your question at all. But yeah, I do think it's a problem to charge these churches a tax to worship through copyright.
Well, more so like copyright. Like, okay, so from on your page, well, I don't know if it's on your page, but on Let's Copy Church, it has a few reasons, I guess, in terms of like copyright. So would you say that copyright prevents like heresy or theft? Like someone's putting words in your mouth that you didn't say, and since everyone has free access to this, we could just switch whatever we want, and we just kind of lose track of the original.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two different things there. One is the enabling of heresy, and the other is like putting words in someone else's mouth. There's already laws against defamation, etc. One unfortunate thing about copyright law, which once again is a feature of the modern world, this didn't exist until about 300 years ago, is that because it sort of covers these different areas, people think that it's the right solution to cover these areas. So copyright exists as an eighth commandment issue, right? Like the whole idea behind copyright is, okay, we're going to treat this intellectual stuff as property. Now, I would argue it's not really property, but let's pretend it is. We're going to treat it as property. That's an eighth commandment issue. Thou shalt not steal. And we're going to make this law to penalize people for this theft. Okay. But then you end up using it for ninth commandment issues, right? Thou shalt not bear false witness. And so because this eighth commandment law kind of helps you address ninth commandment issues, then a lot of people think of the purpose of that eighth commandment law being to address ninth commandment issues. And it really wasn't designed for that. It just has these byproducts, and it's just not what it's for. There's other laws that are supposed to be there to help people, preserve the truth. Yeah, and so then your other question was about heresy. Does it prevent heresy? Well, technically, the King James Bible is still under the eternal copyright of the Crown, and Joseph Smith published his own translation of it, or his own version of it, right? And Thomas Jefferson his own heretical version of it. Now you could say, well, that's because it wasn't being enforced well enough. Sure, but a heretic's gonna write whatever a heretic wants to write. Like, I don't think the amount of good that the freedom of the King James Bible has done vastly outweighs the amount of harm that it's caused by enabling heretics, by enabling Joseph Smith to make his version, or Thomas Jefferson to make his version with the miraculous stuff cut out.
I think an interesting thing, just kind of like what you noted out, is like if the church today were to faithfully follow all the copyright laws, the ministry would be diminished by maybe like 60-75% of the things that they do today. Like certain churches would not even be able to stream, ministries would not be able to be funded, lessons or study material, et cetera. And even myself, like I've been writing a commentary for a couple of years, and we kind of talked about it. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, midway, I have to switch over translations, because if this ever gets published in any kind of way, shape, or form, everyone's like, hey, you're not part of us. Here you go. Here's a $5,000, bounty on your head.
Or what you do is publish your own translation of the Bible and copyright it, and then you're free to write all the commentaries you want in that version.
And then I charge other people. No, I'm joking.
And that's why a lot of these translations exist. A lot of them exist just because this publisher who makes commentaries and things like that, where they can't just get away with fair use, which is, for small quotations, they need their own translation in order to, make sure they're not paying out these fees. And so they make their own translation. Some of these translations are good, but they're not necessarily needed. Like, there's better things for the church at large to be putting its efforts into. And every time I see a new translation come out, like even good ones, I think the LSB is pretty good. But every time I think, man, the real innovation that's needed here is in it being public domain. It's not, it's not in smaller things. But yeah. But just for those who don't know, the BSB, the Berean Standard Bible, is a relatively recent public domain translation. Very useful if you care about these things.
Here's a good.
I was going to say, now with some of these translations, they boast, this deep bench of original language scholars that, have come up with it. Are these public domain versions? Do they say the same thing, or are they just having to change a certain percentage of the language in other translations to make it free from copyright infringement?
The BSB is working with the original languages. Now, I've heard from those who've looked into it a bit more. They aren't entirely clear on who it is that's part of the translating committee. But one thing that makes the Berean Bible interesting is there's 4 tiers to it. So right now, only the BSB is fully published, the Berean Standard Bible. But they have one they intend to do that would be higher than that, which would be a paraphrase.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, You still there? Yeah, and they have one they've into do that's higher than that's paraphrased. They have one lower than that they've completed for the New Testament called the Berean Literal Bible, which is more literal. And then they also have one that's below that, which is an interlinear. And so basically, they started with the interlinear, and then from that they are creating the other one. So it's the Berean Bibles it's actually 4 different editions, 4 different translations. And one of them is just the Greek and Hebrew itself. So they are going directly from that.
How would the original language things like the New Testament fragments, Dead Sea Scrolls, things like that? How does that stuff work, and the use of it in quotations?
Yeah, so those works are in the public domain. Now, what's interesting though is that there's very little penalty for asserting copyright where there is none. And so the museums that own these manuscripts will often assert copyright, even though they don't have copyright to it, or they'll assert copyright over the photographs of them. But you're not allowed to do that because it's not a creative work to just make a mechanical reproduction of a public domain work. So they will claim copyright. And then others who work with them, even if they know that that's not true, they will often have to pretend like it is just to make sure they can maintain those relationships. And so they lock down derivative works for folks. I once talked to, oh goodness, I'm blanking on his name, the Center for New Testament Studies, Dan Wallace. Yeah, I once talked to Dan Wallace about this because he was giving a talk near me, and I asked him, like, why are the various photographs of the New Testament on your website, why are they all listed as being copyrighted? And he said because they have the copyright. These different monasteries and museums have the copyrights. And I say, but they don't really though. He says, well, we have to get along with them. Like, oh, that's terrible. That's terrible.
So then something like, let's say, for instance, the Greek New Testament, Nestle Aland has a number of different editions. They continue to. Would that just be the the actual text itself can be quoted in swaths, or is it just their notes, their technical notes and things like that? What does copyright cover under that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Once again, they assert copyright because, they're claiming that it is a creative work to have drawn from these different manuscripts to put it together. Is that really creative? Well, it shouldn't be. Like, if they're doing a real good scientific job, it should be as uncreative as possible.
Right.
And then secondly, if they did it really well and actually managed to reproduce the autographs being like what was originally written by Paul, etc., then that's a public domain work. And so yeah, why would you copy? It's like conceding that you're not doing a good job by copyrighting it.
I would guess the New World Translation, particularly their Greek, would probably be a little bit more creative than what we would consider.
On more of a
Actually, they do have. So for those who don't know, the New World Translation made by the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower Society, they have an app that they created back in 2013 that lets you look at their interlinear, which is known as the Kingdom Interlinear Translation. Right. And it's basically just the old Westcott Hort. It's not. They aren't creative there. They're only creative in the translations. And if you ever do if you ever interact evangelistically with the Jehovah's Witness, it's really useful because it will even show you in their own interlinear that this is not what this says, that this really says what our Bibles say.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah.
I had a question. So if these copyright laws aren't real but they're recognized by the state, should we have that kind of libertarian mindset as Christians to say, well, the government's only allowed to protect what is actual property. Copyright is not actual protection of any property. Therefore, we shouldn't follow those laws. Or should we just kind of go the Romans 13 route? I'm just going to submit to what the law says. God instituted them, and whether or not I agree with it, it's still, God's divine institution or whatnot. What would be your kind of view in terms of subjecting ourselves to copyright, in terms of, hey, I can't translate this book, I can't recreate this song, or I can't, find a shortcut to this or make a study material for that? What would be kind of your your view on that.
Yeah. So you say if copyright's not real, and I alluded to a minute ago that I have, interesting views on that. When I said that, is it really property? I don't think it is. This is not the heart of my book. I put this in Appendix C because I think it's useful to have, but I didn't want it to be the heart of the book, right? You can accept this distinction between co-labor and reciprocity without taking my views on copyright.
Okay.
But if property is a real thing, if God created man with dominion over the creatures, and that dominion entails like an ownership that is a right that should be enforced, then the question is, are ideas part of that? And you just look at the way these laws are written. They're not to perpetuity, so they don't work like real property, right? Real property is to perpetuity, passed down to your children, to their children, etc. Copyright, maybe one generation or whatever. And then on top of that, you look at the way the laws are written and the purpose, and they say it's to encourage works. It's not to uphold justice. It's to encourage more creative works. So yeah, I do think that these are unjust laws that have only existed once again for 300 years. This is not something that societies everywhere have recognized as being real rights. Now, what do we do with that when, some of these copyrights seem to be hampering the work of the gospel and some maybe not as much? I think a very relevant text here is Matthew 17, 24 through 27. I'll go ahead and read it. When they came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax?" And he said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From who do the kings of the earth take toll or tax? From their sons or from others?" And when he said, "From others," Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. However, not to give offense to them, go to the sea and cast a hook and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself." Okay, so there's this temple tax that's being imposed. From the way Jesus is talking about it, this is an unjust tax that the sons of the king are not obligated to pay. And yet he says, to not give offense, we're going to pay it anyway. And so this is really how I see a lot of these copyright laws, especially when they come into worship and things like books or music, right? Is often, I believe, the right solution is to not give offense by going ahead and interacting with these rules as they exist. At the same time, I do not fault those who, for example, in other countries where it's very rare that you would have a church even consider, paying CCLI, even though these copyright laws are internationally regulated, or in theory, because the government's not seriously enforcing them, because there's not really an offense that's being made here. The offenses here are different than the offenses there for the same thing. They choose not to. And I think that's very reasonable, and I would not fault them for making that decision.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I've kind of seen in my context. It's like with my pastor, he's worked with a lot of people in the Philippines. They're scavenging for resources. They need a lot of good gospel ministry resources, Bibles, everything they need. They're starting from the ground up. And if we're going to say, hey, well, you need this copyright, protection under you, you need this kind of insurance, then we're basically adding to what constitutes a church today. It's not, whether the word is rightly preached and, the ordinances are administered and disciplined. No, now it requires you to have some sort of insurance, intellectual insurance for your church. And in my context, I see, like, for example, in Venezuela, there's a ton of people that are just struggling with finding resources just because everything is just so poor. Right. And I've seen multiple times people having to just, use whatever they have on Google, and only for them to, it's a good thing that it's not being enforced, because I think the ministry and the gospel is going out a lot farther than what it would with copyright. Right. Do you have any other kind of preliminary things? Because I was thinking about going through some memes really quickly on the
sure. Yeah, I'll just add that a lot of times people will hear stuff like that about other, other countries that are more impoverished, and they'll say, "Oh, well, we have a cheaper edition for them," or, I'm happy to give it for free for them. It's just, cost for others. It, the core issue here is the sincerity of the gospel. 2 Corinthians 2:17 says, "For we are men of sincerity, not peddlers of God's word," right? And if you want to be a person of sincerity, you shouldn't charge for it all. It's not how much you charge for it, it's whether you charge for it all. And a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I'm not profiting off of it." It doesn't say if you only charge a penny, then you're not a peddler. You're a peddler if you engage in any kind of commerce with the word of God. Yeah,
Would you think that sin is engaged on the part that pays for it?
that's a great question. A lot of people have asked me that. I don't believe so, and I would appeal to a lot of the medieval writers on simony. So simony, historically, well, it refers to Simon the magician in Acts, but historically, people have used it to talk about the sale of spiritual things, specifically ordinations, but of spiritual things in general. And one thing that they would point out is that there is a difference between paying something to unjustly get it and then something being unjustly withheld from you and paying to get it. So, for example, if you do fit the qualifications for office and the ordination is being withheld from you, and then you pay, that's not the same thing as paying when you're not qualified and it's not being withheld from you, right? And so, another analogy I could make is like, is human trafficking wrong? Absolutely. Is it wrong if your friend is held for ransom and you pay the ransom? Like, maybe it would be unwise to encourage terrorists, in that way. At the same time, like, you cannot hold someone at fault who pays the ransom to free another from slavery, right? And that's essentially what's going on here. Is these things being locked down in a way it shouldn't, and you are not. Yes, you should consider whether or not you're perpetuating a system that shouldn't be perpetuated. I personally choose not to buy Logos, for example, this Bible software, because I don't necessarily want to support that. At the same time, I buy lots of other books that I do want, access to, and I've decided I'm not going to fight that particular battle. But yeah, I think that's the way we should be thinking about it. All right, so
you said you were a software engineer?
I am, yes.
Are you familiar? This is totally off base or off topic, but have you ever heard of Bible Works?
I have, yes.
That fellow retired, and they don't have anybody to pick up the gauntlet.
I
love that software.
When they announced it, like the day they announced it, I emailed them and asked if I could
Really?
help out and take over. Yeah, and they said no, it'd be too hard. It's not worth it. And I sent a couple more emails, and then they just said that.
Oh.
And the reason being because of the number of third-party licenses involved. Because I was offering to like open source it for them, and they're like, it's not possible with all the various agreements and things we have for the different parts of it. So yeah, it's unfortunate how licensing ruins things like that.
Okay. I've hold on. So is there anything else? Because
Go for it.
We got a cool set of memes here. And you could probably tell me what the truth of it is. I need a narrator.
Are these John's memes?
This is from Coffee Church. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I need a narrator here.
All right.
Someone read it out to me.
Heresy. Let's see. Heresy's everywhere. That's why copyright is so important to protect good teaching. So we stop heresy by preventing the free sharing of good teaching. Exactly. You're getting it
now. Sorry, we need to oversee any translations of our gospel resources, and we don't have the time. So you'd rather we have nothing than let it translate it ourselves. Thank you for understanding. We don't need this anymore, but other Christians might. Why don't you make it free to share? Nah. I've collected all the stories about Jesus, but what if they're not taught correctly? No, you can't share it. I need to know how it will be used. Now let's wait for those lost souls to submit their permission request. Here's your pulpit. You're licensed to use it for your church only. Can we adjust the height a bit? You're currently not licensed to modify the pulpit, but there's a knob for it right here. Not allowed. Please submit your request for permission and we'll evaluate it within a month. I've had to, so true story, I've had to go call, and I'm not going to say, but Conley knows who. I've had to call a local printing press because I was wondering whether it was legal to translate their works. And they told me, yes, it's legal as long as no one else reads from it. And so what that means is the copyright only works if another set of eyeballs are looking at it. If another set of eyeballs somehow take my laptop, then I would get in trouble and I would get infringed for copyright usage. And so that seemed to me kind of ridiculous. And by the way, it was I was going to ask you as well. So translations of works, you think those shouldn't even be like under any type of licensure, right?
I mean, once again, yeah, I think these things should be just shared freely.
Okay.
But yeah, one of the difficulties right now that people don't realize when they lock it down is it means people can't translate it unless they come to them, and which is what some people want to do because they want to control the quality or whatever. But man, it's just so much better just to let folks translate the message.
What I've tried to do for me personally is also we haven't talked about Creative Commons, and that's one of the things that is actually encouraged by some of my friends that are saying, hey, well, Josh, you have your own server on Discord, you're making your own like publications unofficially, of course, you should get a Creative Commons license. But for non-commercial things, what would be your perspective on that? Like, I'm not charging you, and I'm not going to, sick the FBI on you, but I'm just going to let people know, hey, if you want to find more where my works are, here's my little code over here. What would be your thoughts there?
Yeah. So so Creative Commons 0 is one way of releasing something into the public domain. So I would be a fan of Creative Commons 0. The other Creative Commons licenses I talk about in chapter 13 of my book. And I basically explain that they all form some form of reciprocity because you're requiring some obligation in return. And you're basically saying, if I'm the source of this message, like this gospel, right, then you owe me this, obligation with what you do with the message. And yeah, I just don't believe it should be that way. There's one argument to be made here, especially considering Simon, who thought that the Spirit could be bought. And then what does 1 Corinthians 2, 12 through 13 say about the ministry? Well, let me just pull it up and quote it, because I think this shows the problem pretty well. So 1 Corinthians 2, verses 12 and 13 say, now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand the things freely given us by God. And we impart this in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual truths to those who are spiritual. So if the message that is given is empowered by the Spirit and he was freely given to us, we've got to be freely giving it. Otherwise, what we are selling is the operations of the Spirit. This is not... if really your work is just a natural work and it's not being taught by the Spirit of God, it is being taught by human wisdom, go ahead and charge for it. But admit that this is not, that you are not teaching as taught by the Spirit.
Okay. Yeah. I see. So what would we say? Like, how do we make people know, hey, I wrote this work, I'm not requiring you. Would you say the Creative Commons 0, or just kind of ask the person okay.
Creative Commons 0 is a good way of doing it.
I really believe, just kind of as a side note, let me see if I can just stop sharing my screen. Just to kind of wrap up, because I didn't want it to make too much of a live.
Sure. I've got memes to share too. If you
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead if you want to.
Where's my share screen button?
You can hit H, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that digital publishing houses are the wave of the future. I think what I've been doing, and I've been working with some other guys who are not Baptists, they're Anglicans, and they've been super helpful in trying to tell me, hey, what you should do is you should have like a digital publishing house. You get all these free domain works, you pump these out. you're not copyrighting them. You're just making them. You're just reformatting them and not requiring anything of anyone. You're just saying, here you go. Here's all the free, and you can dogpile me all you want. Here we go.
All right. Yeah, you can read this if you want. So when I haven't made a bunch of these in a while, but when I first published the book, I made a bunch of memes to promote it.
That's amazing. They're not copyrighted, right?
No.
What's the,
the underlying images maybe, but
what's the bottom left? Uh-oh.
really?
At Dorian Principal. Oh no.
Yeah, a watermark.
You received freely, give freely for a reasonable price.
Yeah, it makes sense if you know the meme format, right? This is the Joey meme where he's repeating after Phoebe and and gets the last part wrong. Yeah, I've got a bunch of quotes.
These are nice quotes. Oh wow.
Yeah. I haven't done this in a while, but let's see.
Can I get a light roast, please? You charge for your book because you think it will make people take it more seriously, but it doesn't.
This is a good one.
Some
of these only make sense with the image.
When you're trying to figure out how to reach into the deep pockets of your converts, the God's word is limited.
Yeah, that's the guy with the small hands. Oh, and if you remember this debacle, the ship that got stuck. Yeah.
The Great Commission.
The ship is called the Great Commission, and then the excavator is called Paywall Gated Gospel Proclamation.
That's great.
Yeah. Let's see.
When your favorite teacher releases a new book for $19.99.
Yeah, the guy's crying. Is this an audio podcast too? Like, do we need to explain the images?
If you want to, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. It's a guy who dabbing, but then he's crying underneath for when he finds out it's at a certain price. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, when a worthy ministry isn't trying to take my money, and then it's Fry saying, "Take my money." That's fun. That's one of those like reverse memes because it's usually someone who's trying to sell something, but this is for someone who's not selling something, and you want to support that kind of ministry. Oh yeah, and then this one is red pill, blue pill, Morpheus. The gospel is to be given free of charge, Matthew 10:7-8, and then the worker is worthy of his wages, Matthew 10:9-10. So a lot of people treat those passages like they're at odds, and you're supposed to just pick one, right? Like, oh, you either give it free of charge or you charge because you're worthy of the wages. But this is saying that they could both held in harmony, and so Neo is labeled discerning Bible reader, and then Morpheus says, "Did you just take both pills?"
Yeah, you've done quite a lot of stuff. Wait, how many years have you been in the Dorian stuff?
Oh, so I published this 2 years ago, but this I made all this like within the first few months. I haven't really spent time doing it since then. But looking up lots of old quotes to publish, a lot of good quotes from all kinds of people you wouldn't even think, St. Patrick, all kinds of people. Yeah, this is I forget his name. The guy in Star Wars Episode 1 says money. Jedi mind tricks, no work on me. Anyway, he says no money, no ministry.
Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah, it's not Jabba the Hutt. It's oh man, what's his name? I forget. Okay, well, my monitor just died for a second there. Okay, we're back up.
There's a lot of these quotes. I remember just kind of like on a historical side. I remember the publishers of the first London Baptist Confession of Faith. What they did, they didn't charge. What they did is they went outside like every Paedo Baptist like congregation like after the sermon, and they would hear like they were talking about these London guys, these London Baptists. And what they did, they just waited outside and had like a whole like stack full of tracts. And they just started passing it out. And they had to print this and stuff like that, but they didn't charge any of the people they were giving it to. What most likely happened is that their local church was helping them just kind of just general offerings and part of the church paradigm and stuff like that. Have you ever thought about making a chart about like what is the kind of, I know it's not supposed to be a systematic theology. I know it's supposed to be more of a virtue, but have you ever thought about like, hey, just here's the Dorian alternative. This is what seminaries are doing now. This is what we should do now. Or this is what local churches are doing. Then this is what we should do now. Like kind of
that's a good suggestion. No, I hadn't really considered that. That's a good suggestion.
Just kind of have like a model, but yeah. When I tell a financially lucrative publishing ministry that 1 Corinthians 2:17 forbids the sale of Christian teaching, I'm sorry, it's this sort of a peasant joke that I'm too rich to understand.
Let's see.
Charging for a seat at church, charging to hear a sermon, charging for an ebook on the gospel. Different, but not really.
Yeah, and that's the one where Jim from The Office is going through baby names and commenting on the different baby names. And yeah, so a lot of people think, oh yeah, it would be terrible to charge for a seat at church or to hear a sermon, but not bad to charge for an ebook on the gospel. And the real question is like, what's the difference? Like what are the differences in people's heads other than this is normal and this is not normal?
So let's say it's not church. Let's say it's a pastor's conference. Could we still charge tickets to attend or no?
For a conference?
Yeah.
For like a gospel conference?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't believe we should. Yeah,
Okay.
I think we should work together with other churches or whatever is necessary to fund it. And then, and maybe set a max capacity or like an RSVP system if that's needed. But that's because like there are physical space limitations, but that's the end of it.
When a Christian publisher gives you a sample, but you are dead broke.
Yeah, that's a picture of Oliver holding up his bowl. The police sir, can I have some more? This is one of my favorites. This is the one of Palpatine telling the Darth Pelagius story. When someone tells me that ministries need to sell biblical teaching in order to fund their work, ironic. They received the gospel freely from another, but could not offer it freely themselves. Lots of quotes. Yeah, the church history quotes are really good. Oh man, I've got a couple about Rick Warren, because when Rick Warren did his things at the SBC where he was like bragging on himself, like so many of his lines fit the 2 Corinthians picture of the super apostles like really accurately. That was an interesting time. So I've got
making over $1 million. I did not know he made over $1 million on royalties.
Yeah, he makes a lot. Now he does something he calls a reverse tithe, where he gives 90% of it. But like, from my perspective, if that's wrongly gotten, then it's the wages of a prostitute. The Bible says you don't bring the wages of a prostitute into the temple. If it's wrongly gotten, then giving 90% of it away to charity or to the church or whatever is not actually noble.
It's like a reverse. What's it called? Forgot his name. Not Peter Pan. Robin
Hood.
Yeah, Robin Hood. There we go.
Yeah. Charge for a service or call it ministry. Dilemma. Let's see.
A quick thing. Another thing. I've got a bunch of these questions because they all come up. YouTube ads on videos. Mm-hmm. Monetizing. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, new YouTube channels don't really have an option as you grow in the number of subscribers and things. You do have that option. I do think that people should turn it off, because what you're doing at that point, the reciprocity at that point is saying you can have my teaching as long as you give me your eyeballs for this period of time, to watch these other things. And I think I think it is a reciprocity.
Okay.
Yeah, this is that one from this is the Breaking Bad meme. I don't know. I've not necessarily like watched these things. I just know the templates, what the templates are about. So this is the Breaking Bad one where the guy lays on the massive stack of cash. It says, when you are overcome by the temptation to commercialize your ministry. Oh yeah, this is a good one. This is a picture from the original Zelda where Link holds up a sign saying, "Please look up the manual for details." And it says before that, when you are wondering how ministries should fundraise and haven't consulted Scripture, because that's the problem. Is a lot of people do all this without even asking themselves what Scripture says.
Well, because we don't think that Scripture teaches anything on this. Like, I think that's the main reason why people just kind of do their own thing, is like, they don't think that there's an actual explicit thing. And when you go through these scriptures, I'm like, wow, okay, he's actually talking about that.
Yeah. I've got some of these images in here that I'm cycling through that people probably have no idea what the context is. This is a picture from a version of Dante's Inferno. These are Simonists, like those who were selling spiritual things, being tormented.
Those are all the Christian YouTubers.
Yeah. Monetizing their ministry. Yeah. This is Pooh saying, I love honey, but you know what I don't love? Teachers peddling the word of God. This is a picture of I forget what his name is, but it's a character from the Canterbury Tales. There was an equating of simony with leprosy back then, and so he's depicted as having a leprous face because he is engaged in the sin of simony and the sin of selling spiritual things.
Huh.
So this is also him.
We're gonna have to do up to you. We're gonna have to do like a historical sketch one of these future days.
Man, there's so much stuff, and I'm not even done. This is when Elon Musk bought Twitter. People started posting things. Next, I'm buying X and making it free or whatever. Next, I'm buying logos and making all the content free.
I would do that. I would definitely do that. No comment. I may or may have not done that.
Let's see. Me, have you read The Dorian Principle? Other person with lame excuses. It's tacky to discuss finances. From The Office. When Gabe says that. Yeah. Let's see. And there's one I'm trying to get to. There's my favorite one somewhere. This is the guy saying, hi, I'd like wake up call. Woman responds, to sell biblical teaching is to peddle the word of God. 2 Corinthians 2:17.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I like this format. Purchasing gospel ministry, investing in gospel.
Yeah. This is the guy on the one side of the bus staring at the rock wall, and the other guy staring at the nice view. And yeah, this is interesting too, because everyone's like, well, how would you support it? It's very simple. Like if there's money and there's demand for it, you can just support it by donations. And if I sell a book to someone, or if I purchase a book, right, I don't feel any obligation to pray for that author. I don't feel like there's no like spiritual connection there. But if I give to a worthy minister, I feel an obligation to hold him accountable. I feel an obligation to pray for him, etc. Right. And these are important things. But the way ministry is funded right now through sales, it comes without the spiritual accountability that's supposed to be involved in this partnership.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna. The earlier illustration you gave, where the citizens are basically the tithers are giving to God, and then God's ministry then funds the authors, the promoters of the gospel. It does definitely produce a way for accountability, much more so. It keeps a lot of this stuff under the watch care, I guess, of the church.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, because there's a voluntary aspect. It's not like, oh, it's just a given, everyone gets paid, because they all made books and they have a publishing house. It's that, hey, I'm consciously putting my decision and my card, my information, my details on the line for a specific thing, and I'm going to be doing that voluntarily with a donation. It's not like, oh, I just want the book. It's like, hey, I'm going to donate, and a donation is not just simply how much the book costs. It's the person's ministry. It's like, how do I view the person?
Right.
Modern ministers charging a discount rate for ministry. It's giving the gospel freely.
Yeah. This is is this pigeon meme where the guy looks at a butterfly and asks if it's a pigeon.
I've never known the original to that. I never knew.
Yeah. There's a lot of. Oh yeah, here's a good one. The Corinthians, you should charge for your preaching, Paul. And then it's the picture of the old Steve Rogers for the Captain America, 2 Corinthians 11:12. And that's where he says, what I'm doing, I will continue to do so that I may show that I'm not like them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And yeah, a lot of people imagine that, oh, well, he's just doing that while they're there, right? He's just as though like he could wear a different colored hat or something and distinguish himself. No, he's not charging because that shows that he's real. He's sincere. Whereas they're charging, showing that they're false. The super apostles. Oh yeah, there's a video game that has in it a book, which includes the first part of John Huss's On Simony, which I have read actually.
Really?
Yeah, so that was interesting. This is more for the obscure. Some of these formats are like really obscure meme formats that only a few people know, but so that's kind of hard to explain. This is the dog sitting on a cloud saying, "I dispense wisdom." The other dog in the plane says, "What is your wisdom?" The dog in the cloud says, "One gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want." Proverbs 11:24. And the other dog says, "That's good wisdom." This is my favorite one because it's so spicy. Jesus, freely you receive, freely give. Ligonier. If you're familiar with Ligonier Ministries, best I can do is $5 Fridays.
Now, have you gotten in trouble with any of your perspectives?
Oh yeah. People really don't like once you start naming specific names, right? People get real angry. And the thing is, I love Ligonier. I think Ligonier is great, but yeah, I still think they do this wrong, right? And I think it's important, and I want to hold them accountable. But a lot of people consider them because they're more generous than most. Like they think that that's the bar is average or whatever. That's not enough. $5 Fridays is not enough. The gospel is to be given freely.
We'll cycle through like three more.
Yeah, sure. That was the one I was trying to get to. Sorry, I didn't realize how far it was away. We could. I mean, that could be the end there. We don't need to hit any of these others. Yeah. Okay, let's stop there.
Okay. Well, just to kind of wrap up. All right. So we talked on the Dorian principle to give, freely, and that ministers should find other ways other than making the resources themselves the means of which someone, earns money. What are your kind of, I don't know. I'm in an elevator right now. I'm going to the first floor. You got to talk to me about what should local churches do. What would be your little elevator speech about what we can actually do instead of just only saying, "Hey, this is a problem." What can we actually do, like proactively, as local churches?
Yeah, if I really only had the time length of an elevator, I'd say keep doing what you're doing and make sure parachurch ministries do too. Right, because the real problem is not the local church. Local church every week does the right thing. They get money from people willing to support the gospel. They use it for the work that's to be done. It's the parachurch ministries that, because they have limited streams of income, they start figuring out what they can sell, and they sell things, right? And so I would like to see local churches hold parachurch ministries accountable, supporting the ones that are truly giving freely. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the shortest thing I could say.
And what are your thoughts, Pastor, on what was discussed?
Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking about the churches that are, poor managers of resources, yet exploit all of the people who make contributions to the gospel that keep the ministries afloat. And it's unfair to them. At the same time, I definitely can understand and appreciate the idea of the church holding accountable those who are producing the materials, making sure they're doing the right thing, saying the right kind of stuff. I mean, I love, like I was making mention some time back to Josh, there was the Reformed people produce so much of their own stuff basically for free. And there is just nothing like that unless you're into the Reformed perspective on theology. I mean, just so much material. But then those who aren't of a strict deterministic flair, it seems, they very proud of their stuff. And it's unfortunate, because if I could build a library full of their stuff, I'd love to be able to do it. But it costs too much. But boy, if you want to get your library full of some strong, sound stuff, all you got to do is go out to some of these Reform sites, and they offer it for nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's cool.
All right. Well, I'm glad having you on, Pastor, as well as Conley Owens. Where could we find you to just kind of keep contact? Like people want to know where you're at. Where do we find you?
Sure. Yeah, I primarily interact online on Facebook groups, but yeah, so Facebook is probably the easiest way. But just in general, yeah, my email address is really easy to find if anyone wants to find my email address. Just conley@svrbc.org or info@thedorianprinciple.org. Yeah.
I will say, if you just put up Conley Owens on Google, that'll be the first thing that will actually show up.
Yeah, and then also there's a group on Facebook called Money and Ministry. That's a group I run on this topic. So yeah, if you'd like to discuss on Facebook, I'm there. Facebook isn't the best place for discussions. I'm thinking about moving my social world at some point, but I just don't know when.
We're going on Twitter.
Maybe
Conley would get like absolutely blown up. But yeah, my pastor left. So anyways, thank you guys for watching this live. Maybe Lord willing, maybe Conley could give us a historical sketch maybe later down the line about, like, you know, how it's church ministry actually kind of functioned, and how funding worked for seminaries, local churches, you know, gospel material, and how these ministers were able to live pretty much normal lives without having this kind of commercialized paradigm. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys got something out of this.